Hi, welcome back to another episode of Algebra in Words, the video series. In this video, I'm going to do one more example of completing the square, or the complete the square method. And remember, if you want to follow along with this in my book, Algebra in Words 2, it starts on page 91, and you can find the link to that on Amazon in the description box below. In that book, I write the steps so that you can follow it step by step in worded form, and I show you and map out all the steps and what they'll look like. But in this case, we're going to go over another example live. So what I have on the board is another quadratic equation. X squared minus 9x plus 7 equals 0. And we want to check to make sure everything is in proper form. It's in standard form, so that's good. And we have to look at A. A is both positive and 1, so we don't need to make any changes there. We're good to continue into the next steps. Now the next step is going to be to move C to the other side. And now let's write what we have with a space on the left and the right, a place to put the new C. Okay, and those lines are for the new C. I went over in detail the steps of the complete the square method in the previous video if you want to look back, but I'll assume that you watched that and we're just going to continue with the steps here. The next step is to find the new C. And if you remember, the new C is found by the formula b over 2 squared. We take the b from the standard form of the original equation. In this case, it's negative 9. All right, and we can't simplify negative 9/2 anymore, so we're just going to have to square the top and bottom, and that's going to give us 81/4. All right, so let's add 81/4 to both sides. Okay, that's done. Now, on the left, we now have a perfect square trinomial, and we're going to factor that into a binomial squared. That's going to be, all right, x, and it's going to be minus because this is minus. And we're going to take the square root of this, which is going to be 9/2. And that's squared because a perfect square trinomial factors into a binomial squared. Now on the right, we have negative 7 over 81/4. And because one of them is a fraction, we need to convert them into like fractions. So let's multiply the top and bottom of negative 7 by 4. And that's going to give us, let me just write that over here, it's going to convert to negative 28/4 plus 81/4, which becomes 53/4. And now we're going to take the square root of both sides. Don't be worried by the fact that 53/4 on the right is like a fraction with weird non-perfect square numbers. That's fine, that's normal, but we'll work that out by the end. On the left, the square root of the binomial squared is going to equal just the binomial x minus 9/2. And on the right, basically, we could leave it as that, but let's think of it as breaking it up into the square root of 53 over the square root of 4. And that way, since 4 in the denominator is a perfect square, we can take the square root of that. And let's reduce this now into plus or minus the square root of 53 over 2. Remember, in the denominator, we took the square root of 4 to get 2 or plus or minus 2. Don't forget the plus or minus. And now what we're going to do is solve for x, and we need a positive and a negative form, so let's do that here. Let's do the positive form here. All right, and now let's add 9/2 to both sides. And on the right, we get square root of 53 plus 9. And that's all over 2. Usually we write the whole number first, so 9 plus square root of 53 over 2. And now let's also do the negative form of this, which would be like x minus 9/2 plus 9/2 to both sides. So let's go from here and say plus 9/2 and plus 9/2, and I'm running out of room. But long story short, it's going to come to x equals, and remember, 9/2 and negative square root of 53/2 are both over 2. So basically, it's going to become positive 9 minus square root of 53 over 2. So let me just write what the answers would be over in this little empty space. And I have it written as x equals 9 plus or minus square root of 53 over 2. And you can consolidate your answer, or your two answers, into one like that, but it's really showing two answers because it's plus and minus. Before we end this video and example, one thing I want to point out is, when you get to these steps, you still want to see if there's a greatest common factor in the numerator. And if there is, I would recommend factoring that out, because then, if there is one, then you're going to see if that factor is a common factor with the denominator, and if it is, then factor the top and bottom. Otherwise, if it's not, then you're done and you can circle the answer. So anyway, I hope you found this helpful. That's another example of the complete the square method. And I hope you see that it is normal to get radicals in your answer in the end. But remember always to split it up into the positive and the negative form of whatever it is, and that represents two answers. If you were going to graph that, you could put the radical into the calculator and then add or subtract accordingly and get two decimal form answers that you could use to graph on the graph. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.